Right now, Colorado is mired in one of the most polarizing and explosive debates of our time.
The oil and gas industry is one of the backbones of our state's economy, but voters could give it a 1-2 punch this fall if approved. Proposition 112 would set back new oil and gas operations roughly half a mile in every direction, from homes, buildings, parks, and schools.
And as part of Denver7's commitment to 360 storytelling, we are letting you take a seat at the table. Table 7 to meet the landowners, the workers, the professors, and the activists who want to give you a piece of their mind before you vote.
Well, here we are. Is Noah good? Oh, he's happy now. Well, we're here at the beautiful Greeley Chop House, and I appreciate you all coming to talk about this. And we're here in the oil and gas country, I guess you could say, here in Colorado. I think we can all kind of agree on that. And, you know, to talk about what I think is, most people would agree, has become a very polarizing and, you know, divisive issue for so many, for a lot of different reasons. And we've got a lot of different faces at the table. I didn't think it would be possible to actually get to sit around a table and talk about this, but by golly, we're going to do it. So, well, I'll tell you what, let's just kind of go around the table here. I'm obviously Ryan Luby, investigative reporter at Denver7. Let's just start maybe on my left here. Tell me who you are, you know, where you came from, and you obviously have a vested interest in having part of this conversation.
Well, my name's Steve Hall, and I'm Vice President for Springs Fabrication, and we're a large metal fabricator, build process equipment for the oil and gas industry and many other industries. We're not just solely on oil and gas. Been in the industry for probably a total of close to 30 years, off and on, through various sabbaticals. And native of Colorado, grew up in a little town just east of here, Fort Morgan. Worked in the industry throughout, coast to coast, and even into South America and Mexico. So
you get it, basically.
Well, I get at least one side of it, but we've had debates and seen a lot of changes in the business. This business has changed dramatically.
And Sarah, tell us about yourself. We have your son Noah with us, and it's awesome that he can join us. Give us a little background on what you do. You founded an organization that also is interested in oil and gas, but for slightly different reasons.
So, my name's Sarah Laughlin, and I founded an organization about 3 years ago that was aimed at helping impacted Coloradans who are facing nearby oil and gas development near their homes, within their communities, really find a voice and a place within the process that is, to say the least, complex. And to really make sure that their concerns, their wants, their frustrations were being heard, had a seat at the table when it comes to decision making about oil and gas sites that are happening at their homes and near their communities. So,
right. Well, and Susie, you're kind of one of those people.
Yes.
Really? I mean, tell us about yourself, Susie.
Susie Brundage. I live in. Am I supposed to look at the camera?
You can just look right at me.
Okay.
Yeah, you're fine. We're having a conversation here.
I live in Thornton, Colorado. I have lived there for the last 25 years. I am a social worker by day, toddler mom by night, and the reason that I'm here today is because I am an impacted citizen. I have a proposed well a couple miles from my home, and I have currently been force-pulled. So I have a unique perspective in terms of navigating what it's like to have oil and gas come into your community and how that really impacts your voice.
Right, absolutely. Well, and Gary, you have people who are would-be, or you know people would that work at those types of facilities, right? Tell us about yourself.
So, Gary Arnold, I'm the business manager, financial secretary, treasurer at Denver Pipe Fitters Local 208. We represent just over 1,800 total members. About 400 of those are retirees. The rest of them are active employees working through a variety of the pipe fitting industry, including oil and gas. So we have members that do building trades construction. We have members doing fabrication, including fabrication for some of the oil and gas facilities. We have HVAC service technicians, and then we have gas distribution members installing and maintaining the underground natural gas lines feeding businesses and homes, things throughout the metro area and state of Colorado.
So you're working with the technology that this guy, Dr. Will Fleckenstein from School of Mines. Tell us about yourself. You know the history, you know where we're at, and you know the future, essentially, of oil and gas technology. Is that fair to say?
It's halfway fair, I guess. Yeah, my name's Will Fleckenstein, and I'm an adjunct professor at the Colorado School of Mines. I was the department head there in 2012 to 2014. I've worked out in industry since 1986. Actually worked for 7 years in industry as a roughneck and a roustabout, then as a drilling supervisor, drilling engineer for 7 years before I came back to get my doctorate in 2000 was when I got my doctorate. And I've been at the School of Mines essentially ever since. And so I've seen the industry kind of grow up into what we call fracking. I drilled my first horizontal well in 1991 and have been involved with moving from the vertical to the horizontal wells ever since.
Right. And Lowell, tell us about yourself.
My name is Lowell Lewis. I live with my wife in West Greeley, and we became introduced to the industry starting in September of 14 when we had our first neighborhood meeting, and we're told that there is a 22 well site that is going to be placed in our quote-unquote backyard. It's about 1,400 feet, 1,200 feet from our home. And I've been educating myself in the process. We've formed a neighborhood group. We fought the well early on. It is now producing oil and gas, and I'm hopeful that I can be helpful to other people such as Susie and other organizations, other groups, other towns that will be facing what we have been through now.
Right.
So I'm an impacted citizen in the past and present tense.
Well, let's just get down to it. I mean, we all know there are two significant ballot initiatives that voters here in our state are going to decide on this fall. Both of them, as we've seen, are extremely polarizing, divisive. The rhetoric has just been, I mean, intense at times is probably the safest way to say that. You know, one of those proposals would create 2,500-foot setbacks for new oil and gas operations. And then on the flip side of that, there's a proposal that would essentially allow property owners to go after the government if they were to lose value on their property, such as through setbacks. Maybe, I'll start with anyone here at the table. I don't, whoever wants to start, jump on in. Maybe we start with Sarah, I don't know. But let's just talk about, you know, I mean, there's obviously differing views to this legislation. He's good. Thank you. Talk about this legislation, Sarah. Where do you kind of stand on this? It's obviously an important topic for you.
Well, so for Initiative 112, and I'm wondering, is there someone who wants to hang with me for a minute?
We can make friendly.
So, appreciate it. So for Initiative 112, I guess what I would say is, over the last three and a half years, we've watched folks who are not necessarily diehard environmental anti-fracking activists come to their local governments, come to the state with reasonable proposals, asking for things like updates to wellhead integrity regulations, asking for things like, 1,000-foot setbacks from football fields, asking for things like expanded air quality monitoring to be written into regulations, into local laws, into state level laws. And the common denominator when those folks come to the table, and these are folks like Lowell and Susie who have not come out saying, I want to ban fracking tomorrow. These are folks like Lowell saying, if this is coming in and there's truly nothing you can do about it, can you at least make it a stipulation that we have the best protections possible for health and safety. And those proposals have been met with hostility on the part of, I would say, the industry folks. They have not been met with, let's have an honest conversation about that. They've been met with, well, Lowell Lewis, you're just an anti-fracking activist. Or with, well, so-and-so, you're just an anti-fracking person who wants to ban it all, rather than a, let's have a legitimate conversation. Yes, you bring some valid points about regulating venting near homes, about regulating wellhead integrity that has caused some issues in parts of the state. And with some of the older generational wells, some of the horizontal drilling has caused issues with the integrity of older generational wells.
Right. Well, and to be clear, as we watch Noah here enjoy himself, I mean, this is an issue for a lot of people that deals with health and family and safety, and there's a desire to try to, see if we can make those people feel more comfortable about raising their kids here. But on the flip side of that, and maybe, Gary, maybe you can kind of weigh in, the proposal about these setbacks, I would imagine you all are just not very thrilled with this idea at all. And explain why. So,
and no, we have come out and formally opposed Proposition 112 because we think it is a step towards an overall ban when you look at the overlaps and how much of the land would be off limits to new oil and gas development. Now, the concern there is when you take that much of it away from development, the workers within the industry, where do they go? That's how they pay their mortgages. That's how they feed their families. And I don't think anybody wants to dismiss anybody's concerns, especially not from our point of view. We understand that folks are going to have concerns within communities about the environment, about their families. Our workers live and raise their families in the communities as well. So I think it becomes what we would favor more of a conversation about, well, what kind of regulations and standards, some of the things would address the concerns. Our favorability always leans towards what's going to provide worker safety, maybe training, certifications to ensure that they're utilizing the new technologies. When you look at tankless, closed loop systems that address venting and emissions concerns from communities and environmental groups, those are the conversations that we're interested in having. That includes workers within the industry. When you go to what, the facts on Proposition 112 and how much it takes away, and in our opinion leaning more towards an overall ban, it feels like the workers within that industry never got a chance to take part in that conversation at all. And that's the frustration is, you can't eliminate an industry and leave that many workers standing outside in the cold.
Right, absolutely. Well, I would imagine, Sarah and Lowell, have you all ever been in a situation where you've had a conversation with people in the industry, some of the people who are kind of involved in the policy discussions? Does that ever really happen for you all? And I guess if you do, what would be your questions for someone like, Gary or for Dr. Fleckenstein or even for Steve here? I'm guessing you have questions, right?
So I do have friends that work in the industry. I think most people know people that work in the industry either peripherally through the pipe fitters or actually in the office at an oil and gas company or as an engineer or a lawyer. My concern is that the people, regular everyday citizens, also feel like we haven't been heard. I have been told at every level of government that I've gone to that there's nothing anybody can do. I actually went to a COGCC hearing for a spacing application for the well for my home, and in the testimony that I was giving, I asked if the commissioners cared about our concerns. Did they take them seriously? And half of the commissioners were playing on their phones. And then after the testimony, one of the commissioners ran up to me and said, I hear your concerns, but there's nothing I can do about it. I'm sorry. And for me, it just feels I feel like my voice has been taken away, that my concerns have been pushed to the side. And not only is that frustrating for me, but I'm also trained as a social worker, and that's part of my my job and my training and my role is to give people a voice, to empower them to voice their needs and concerns, and to do it in a way to make sure that it gets met. And I feel like regardless of who I go to or what I do, there's nothing that I can do or say that would actually have my voice heard. And I do have some real concerns, and I'd be interested to hear from Lowell. I'm just talking about the permitting process at this point. But I do have some real concerns about health and safety. There are no air monitors north of I-70. So how do they know that the air is safe to breathe, that these two huge mega sites that are sandwiching my niece's elementary school aren't producing toxic emissions that my niece is then breathing when she's reading during the day? So long story short, I hear what the workers are saying, and I absolutely agree. I think if you work hard, you should be able to make an honest living. And I think everybody has the right to a job. But I also think that we do need to listen to the other side as well. And so that's why I'm really thankful that we're having this.
What do you make of that? I mean, Gary, or how do you all respond to that, those of you in the industry?
Sorry,
How do you respond to what her concerns?
It's valid concerns. I would say it's been my experience that there's a tremendous amount of air monitoring done, and maybe there needs to be a better process of sharing those results and making sure folks understand that those monitors are going on, that they are looking at it. Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has looked at it multiple times, obviously charged with ensuring that we're not breathing in toxic chemicals or things that are bad for our health, causing increases in diseases, and they've come out and found that they haven't seen those increases. Now, I would say, once again, it becomes an issue of educating and understanding 100% the frustrations somewhat involved in how rulemaking takes place. And pipe fitters have a lot of experience in this process throughout. Energy, right, when it comes to power generation and dealing with the Public Utilities Commission, you know, a bill that we were in favor of and lobbied hard and got passed, the Keep Jobs in Colorado Act, you know, back in 2014, I believe, and experiencing a 3-year time period and the very painful moments of going through a full rulemaking process, going down to the COGCC and participating as interveners during the latest flow line rulemaking process is where we found that we've had the most success. We've been able to have those discussions with American Petroleum Institute, locally here at Colorado Petroleum Council, about what we felt like needed to be worker certifications and requirements as part of those flow line rulemaking. We were successful in reaching a consensus agreement that now requires all welders on pressurized flow lines to be certified in accordance with 2 of the nationally recognized welding codes. All the production flow lines, now those welds have to be tested in accordance with federal PHMSA standards. And those things take into account urban density. So the closer you get to urban developments, the stricter the standards come, the more the x-rays are required. So those are things that we feel like don't eliminate man hours, paychecks for workers, but do make the process overall safer for the community and the surrounding environment. So I understand the frustrations, but myself, I was a pipe fitter. I definitely was not prepared for some of the technicalities that are involved in representing the membership and the local, and we've kind of worked our way through some of that process.
Do you guys want to pass the food before this gets cold? By the way, this is apparently like one of their specialties here. I don't know if you all want some.
They look fantastic.
I was going to say, what is that over there?
This looks like some.
Well, take one and pass it around. Let's take one. Let's eat, folks. I'm starving. So,
If I may, you brought up a very good point, and air quality has become in the forefront of the industry since 2004 when the Clean Air Act was adopted. It was called Reg 7, and Reg 7 set in place a requirement that well site emissions on a gradual basis, because they couldn't do it all overnight, had to gradually either eliminate by destruction or by regathering to put in a pipeline and no longer emit them to atmosphere. Years, venting went off to atmosphere. We are under no tolerable venting at this time off of well sites. They must either be captured and destroyed or captured and put into the pipeline or into the product. And those are very stiff penalties, and stiff penalties if a company fails to report them, to the tune of a minimum of 10 grand just for failure to report it. Even if they go to vent to do maintenance, they have to do that. I understand, and I hear your concerns, and I appreciate those. I do. The industry. Oh, just let me set something, kind of a clarification of terms. Fracking is a part of the drilling operation. Okay, so it's drilling, and we're producing wells. So when the fracking process is there, it's a very short time period during completion. But on the emissions, that's a big deal and a huge improvement, and they can't go back. And it's set. Colorado's Reg 7 was the model legislation for Pennsylvania, for the Texas Railroad Commission in Texas that they're working off of, and pretty much numerous across the country. And it was the pilot project. It truly was. And it was not fun because it was doing things that had never been tried to do, and you had to invent things, you had to do this. Now, when the other side of my interest in this was, I also was on the board of directors of the Greeley School Board, Greeley School District, for 4 years. We've got 23,000 students here in Greeley, and we've got well sites all around Greeley. I have not seen, I don't deal with the CGOC, CC. I have not had that, and I've dealt with commissioners, and they are somewhat, to a certain degree, governed by the restrictions and the guidelines that are law, and then such as setbacks and so forth, and then also property rights and the rights of property owners to recover their property. There is no excuse for someone giving you the response that they gave you in that. None. And
I don't want to interrupt you, but they're not the first person to tell me that.
No, and I'm not saying that they are. I'm not sticking up for anyone. There's just no excuse for it. But I will say, in conjunction with my friend here from the Pipe Fitters Union, I think oil and gas is willing to work with realistic regulation. Under the current proposed regulation of Prop 112, 84% of all available land outside of the federal properties in the state of Colorado would be eliminated from any drilling. 94% of all land in the 5 producing basins in this state. That leaves 6%, which basically is nobody can afford to have anybody here to develop. The other side of the coin is the assessed property value. For example, Greeley-Evans School District 6 will lose $22 to $25 million per year funding directly from oil and gas. The Bridgedale School District will have already calculated that they will lose half of their funding. Weld County itself 53% of the assessed property valuation within Weld County is oil and gas. The 140,000 jobs include waiters in this restaurant, and include cleaners, and include car dealers, and include all of that. I lived through the downturn of the 80s, which was the worst downturn the oil industry had ever had. And Denver was a ghost town. And there weren't jobs and property values. Now, I'm not saying that money is worth trading safety. Money is never worth sacrificing safety. And the quality of life. There is a mix. But there needs to be a mix. The industry is too vital to the viability of Colorado state government and Colorado communities and agriculture. Most of these $400,000 tractors haven't been purchased in these last 10 years via the price of corn. So if we can have a conversation, all of us together, the industry, the landowners, and base it off of factual data, and listen to one another on their concerns, then if we can't work this out, shame on us. Because there's room for all of this, but that should not be tolerated, what you're doing, and it's just not. But I had people that would bring things in when I was on the school board that were just flat out erroneous data, and I would not call them out on it during a meeting in public, but I would catch them afterwards.
So I think you bring up fair points. I think the problem is we have a process that has become so inaccessible. If a new store or a new business is proposed near your home or near your neighborhood, neighbors like these would go through a public process where they have a legitimate say, they have standing in terms of what happens with regard to whatever business. When it comes to oil and gas in particular, and I've watched this happen time and time again, that instead of actually getting to have a legitimate conversation with whether it is local government folks, whether it is the operator, because I can tell you both of the impacted citizens sitting at this table have been to several meetings hosted by operators. If they have been listened to, heard, and their concerns actually addressed, and further concerns on a broader basis actually addressed at the regulatory level, at the legislative level, I don't think we'd be in this place. But I think when you start to tell a large quantity of citizens that you are proposing a large-scale industrial facility near their homes, and that any of their concerns are simply anti-fracking or anti-oil and gas.
That's not what I said.
No, I know that's not what you said, but when they are treated as such, I'm saying on a general level, then you have citizens taking matters into their own hands. When you have leadership failing to acknowledge that the industry has some real concerns, these citizens have some real concerns, and we actually need to come to some resolution that happens across the board and that is not tilted to one, or extraordinarily tilted to one side or the other. When that fails, then citizens come up with their own solutions, and it may or may not be great policy, but they're left with nothing else. And I think the problem is we've come to such a point where, again, on a policy level, folks have painted each other as so extreme that we have the 2,500-foot setback, which again is a response to nobody's listening to our health and safety concerns and nobody's doing anything about it. And then you have 74, which frankly has extraordinarily broad sweeping consequences that are far beyond oil and gas.
Oh yeah.
And regardless of what side of the political spectrum you sit on, whether you lean or whatever, the consequences of 74 go as far as, you know, saying that local and state government can make no decision without getting sued and having to pay somebody. And that has been the analysis of several attorneys that sit on both sides of the spectrum. And so we have this sort of impasse happening that, quite frankly, is a little scary in terms of making progress.
Well, the property rights issue didn't just start overnight.
Okay.
And it started with irrigation wells back in the 80s and the 90s when the state literally seized water rights from farmers. And so the states' rights issue and property rights, that's a whole other thing that just compounds the spectrum. And I agree with you, it compounds it. But I would take one point of issue. It's not like a store owner. The property rights issue makes the difference between the recovery of property and then just building a facility for a retail store. There is no property there to recover. You're building your business there. So until the property rights issue is settled, because people own the underground rights, you could own them, I could own them, companies own them, water rights, all of that, or they just own surface rights. But until that is, and there is some settled law and some precedential law that municipalities are not to interfere with that, with a reasonable attempt to recover a person's property. So we've got to come together and decide what that reasonable attempt is. I mean, and I'm compassionate for you. I'm compassionate.
You bring up a couple of good points, and I think one of them, in my mind, is the idea of an oil and gas facility versus a store. And in my mind, we don't put chemical plants in the middle of a neighborhood. Why do we put an oil and gas facility? I do know that we originally had a site proposed 3 years ago that was 19 wells and was going to go 2 miles. They moved it up the road, and now it's been permitted. It's called the Ivy site. It's 26 wells and will go 3 miles. So technology is improving. And there's scientific studies out there that show an increase in hematological issues, respiratory issues, cancer, within a certain amount of closeness or proximity to a home. And 2,500 feet is for several of those. And so I think that's where that came from, although I was not a part of making that policy. I do think that the other piece that you did mention that was really important was property rights. And I think that one thing that 112 and 74, 112 specifically doesn't address is the idea of mineral rights. I own my minerals. I own my surface. I own both. And at this point, I've been force pooled because a certain amount of people, which could be very low, agreed to it. So at this point, it's been taken from me.
That's a whole nother issue.
That's a whole nother
issue. But it hasn't taken your asset from you, because it hasn't taken your financial benefit, whether you wanted that or not. It hasn't taken that away. But the force pooling, came into play back in the 50s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 60s.
Well, forced pooling's been around for a long time.
Very long time.
And it's changing, obviously. You know, as the industry, when I was in school in 1982, we had 4,500 rigs drilling these vertical wells. And so it used to be vertical wells, you'd have to have a tremendous number of these spread out through the city, which would be a totally ridiculous thing to do. So now we've entered into this area of directional drilling and now horizontal drilling and multi-stage fracturing. And so that 4,500 rigs you had in 1982, the drilling vertical wells, right now there's less than 60. wells, they're drilling vertical wells. And so the industry's totally changed. But as it's changed, it's also got this directional drilling, which gives you the ability to move around where that surface location is. But you have to have it somewhere. And there is where the rub is how do you decide where to place this location, because you're also going to have maybe production facilities which may be in a totally different location. Then you have to have flow lines to get to them, et cetera. And so the technology, like I said, is going to continue to move. You might even have wells that are 4 miles long now, which means that they're going to even give you more remote access that may address some of these issues for people. And so that's the thing.
You're dealing, because you're dealing with that this type of issue. Was it? I mean, you told me before we sat down to talk about this that was it 22 wells?
Yes.
Explain that.
22 wells on one site, and they have they go laterally 2.5 miles, which at the time they started the project was going to be a state record. I will never say I'm anything other than a newbie, and I'm sort of self-taught in this extremely complex industry, and I wish so many times that you were right there at the end of my phone so I could find out what that means. But I have tremendous health concerns with the entire process of the extraction of oil and gas. In particular, we thought that we at the Triple Creek plant in West Greeley, which is the one that's 1,200 feet or so from our back door, we thought the worst of it was over. We had gone through the entire process up to production. Production started, meaning that the well started producing oil, I think on the first well on October 8th of last year, and they were all producing by the end of the calendar year. We thought that the worst days were over, and then I found out a couple of months ago that there's a process ongoing through the CDPHE where they're going to be requesting construction permits. And what happened was, after you start production, you've got 60 days to file paperwork with CDPHE so that they can fill out the paperwork for you and put it up for the public to observe and comment. And then they sign off on these forms, which basically say here's going to be the allowed amounts of emissions from this site in the future. From the time that started, first production on October until July the 16th, when they signed off on those forms, there are no regs by either CDPHE or COGCC as to a limit that can be emitted from our site. During the month of December alone, we had over 109 million cubic feet of natural gas was flared from that one project, along with, at minimum, 61 tons of volatile organic compounds. And this is all from COGCC tables on their website. And I've also had them endorsed by people from CDPHE and COGCC to say that yes, these numbers are correct. And I presented this to a COGCC meeting back in July, and they want to follow up. They want to hear what happened, and basically everyone did exactly the right thing. They needed to release the natural gas, and of course, as Steve said, you can't vent it. You can't vent it. You have to flare it. You have to burn it and hope that it's mostly consumed. But this is an inordinate amount of pollutants that are emitted into our neighborhood that surrounds this plant. And there is nothing to keep this from happening again. Fortunately, the pressures are dying off, the flow is dying off as the wells start to produce. But my concern through all of this is for the various neighborhoods, whether it's your neighborhood or whether it's the Bella Romero school site, where the same contractor Extraction has promised that they will not drill during the academic year. And that's a nice statement to make, but it means nothing if they're totally allowed to flare millions, hundreds, possibly hundreds of millions of cubic feet of natural gas over the course of a month. And their site is going to be larger than ours. They're going to be 24 wells. And those kids are going to be playing within a few hundred feet on the playground, where the school building, yes, is far enough away. They are 1,000 feet away. That's cool. But those kids are out. When they're in the school building, they're sitting at desks, and they're not breathing heavily, and they're not exercising. But when they're out in that playground, those kids are, when this happens, and it's not an if, it's likely a when, the natural gas production facilities, or the ability to transport natural gas off the sites, is a real weak point here in northern Colorado. And as soon as anything happens, things get shut down, it's an upset condition, and you've got to get rid of that gas. And that's what happens. It happened to us, and there's no way that anyone can tell me that they can predict, they can assure that that will not happen again.
Is that accurate? Is that, I mean, is this, how do you all, I mean, you all know the technology of this better than anyone at this table.
Well, if you have an upset condition, it's automatically taken to flare. A large thermal combustor, thermal oxidizer, which those are certified under a Quado certification to where they have to be a minimal, and it can't have volatile organics going out the top. It has to have 99.9% efficiency and destruction under law to be even sold for that purpose.
It's stated as 98.
Yeah, 98.9, 99. Last I heard it was 99.9.
I have not
So
seen it change.
It could be 98. And the Bella Romero is 1,453 feet. And it's 1,000, just right under 1,000 feet to the edge of the playground. It's not, it's, I can't remember now because I was on the board when we did that. But it's 1,453 feet to the building. It's right at 1,000 to the edge of the playground, 1,900 feet. And then if they extend, if they were to acquire more property, they do a flip on the other side. So it's well beyond legal setbacks.
Which does not alleviate my concerns for their health when situations like what happened to Triple Creek happen at Bellow under the wrong wind conditions over the course of a month, an entire month.
Well, I can't understand. I mean, they probably issued a flare permit for a month so that they could produce the well.
It was an upset condition.
Get rid of the gas.
So
not for a month. It wasn't upset all that time. They'd shut them in.
I was told COGCC, actually Director Murphy requested that Mike Leonard, who's in charge of community relations, answer my concerns. So he sent a report to me, and basically it ended up saying that during the course of the month of December, there were several occurrences. Several separate occurrences. Primary one being that the Lucerne 2 facility went down over the course of maybe a day or more. But again, these emissions occurred during the course of the entire month of December.
So the Lucerne facility, now that makes more sense. Lucerne facility is owned by DCP, Duke ConocoPhillips, which is the largest midstream gatherer here of the gas stream.
Midstream being?
Midstream from the wellhead, that's where midstream starts, to the transporter, for example, if it's going to be a CIG or a Kinder Morgan, a large pipeline company,
big pipeline, right.
or through a process to get them into the end user for distribution. And that gas does feed to that Lucerne, who's been in a constant state of expansion. So that makes sense.
It's under capacity. The system is way under capacity.
Well, let me ask you guys this. I mean, it's
true.
You all are we're having a conversation here. I feel like that sometimes isn't had anywhere. I mean, you feel frustrated. You feel frustrated. You feel frustrated because it doesn't seem like anyone's really talking to each other. What are the two ballot initiatives that we have right now? How do you all individually feel? Is this one of those things where that you would encourage people, to pass this, or based on maybe what you're hearing here, maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and think about it again? Or how do you all, I guess, square that?
I support 112. I am very concerned for the health of children. I work in hospice, so I'm a geriatric social worker. I'm concerned about the impacts on people whose health might not be so great. I'm also concerned about some of what you guys have been talking about with the existing sites that are going on. I know that there was a school up in Greeley that it was leaking VOCs for quite some time. I don't know the details. They don't know how long, but it was leaking right next to a playground, like a few hundred feet next to a playground where children were playing. I know that there have been spills near my home, less than a mile from my home, with an existing well. It was a historic spill. I also know that a couple miles up the road from me, there were pipelines that were corroded next to a baby park, and all of that that product spilled out into the ground. So I think it's a really complex issue, and I think for me it all underscores the idea that these large-scale industrial facilities don't belong in neighborhoods.
I would agree with that 100%. If there's one thing that summarizes my concerns, it is the worst case scenario is these few oil and gas developers who specialize in shoehorning in tight residential neighborhoods where larger, more responsible operators refuse to go. Some of them, I'm told, won't even do work inside of city limits. But we're talking not only city limits, we're talking about tight residential neighborhoods, just exactly like what happened in our backyard. And that gives, if the industry is concerned about its reputation or about its perception in the public, these guys are doing it so much harm. And you can follow it all the way through to the way they presented it originally to us, all the way through the process. It has been a very unpleasant experience, and to whatever extent I can keep in touch with people such as yourself and let you know what we've experienced and what worked and what didn't. Usually it didn't, because big oil does not lose. They do not lose.
Just to kind of wrap this all together and up here, you all hear this. I mean, you teach students. I mean, you've said, I think you told me you've estimated, what, thousands of people may work in the industry here in some capacity, or have, that you've come through your classroom and are now in the communities. You've worked in the industry. You all hear these concerns, and I mean, you're not ignoring them. So just to, again, to wrap this all up here, as these two initiatives are on the ballot right now, people are going to be deciding on this. These are significant measures. We all agree on that. What's the better, maybe, solution going forward so we're not having these polarizing sort of viewpoints?
Open communications by the industry would be helpful.
Yeah.
So I would 100% agree. And obviously, like I said, I don't want to dismiss anybody's concerns because they're valid. And our members and our workers live and raise their families in the same communities, so everybody's health concerns are valid. I would say the one things that I have been able to see and look at, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment did do a comparison. Everybody knows the majority of oil and gas developments take place in Weld County. Close to 90%, I want to say. I don't have the exact number, but a large amount of it in the state is in Weld County. It's shown over and over again, those health concerns are not elevated in Weld County compared to surrounding counties. So I'm not saying that dismisses the health concerns, because it doesn't. They're valid as they see a more intersection between urban development and oil and gas. I think a lot of the things, and that's really why the reason I was excited to have this conversation here, is there are these newer technologies, there are tankless closed loop systems that I think if there was open communication and people felt like they were being heard, would put everybody's mind at ease. I think ultimately it provides more opportunity for those workers to earn an income and provide for themselves as well. Being from a labor organization, I'm opposed to 112 because of the effects it has on the overall industry. But probably aside from the views on oil and gas, I also oppose 74. I think there's just too broad of effects there. I think you've seen a similar measure have some not great effects in Oregon when it was implemented here in the recent past, and some of the lawsuits that came forth and the problems it creates with overall governance. So I think both measures kind of go a little bit too far. And if you had industry and you had community groups and you had the environmental groups and you had workers all at the table, there's a tremendous amount of smart folks in this state that could figure out these problems that doesn't just put somebody completely out of business. And that's where I think that both of them just go a little bit too far.
Well, I appreciate you all sitting here and having this discussion. I mean, it's obviously, we could go on for hours probably talking about all this stuff, but to the benefit of everybody, I think, and we will continue this conversation. That's why we have these Table 7s, to just at least give people a small look into the world of what it's like to try to hash something out. Exactly. But I appreciate you all being here for this. I really do. Thank you.